do a mic check?
Yeah.
It's working. It's working.
Yeah. So, Philippe, Cynthia, your parents, and we need to have. Where's your husband? He's coming.
Restroom.
So we just need to add one. Do we have enough? We have 5 chairs? Yeah, we do. So you, so how about your husband next to her and the two of y'all? And then, yeah, she's coming. Right, so you, oh no, that's gonna be Letitia. Letitia, you, John and Rachel. Hey, John? Extra. Got some experience. We need to put 4 here. Let's do 4.
Hey, Rachel. Your third chair. All right. Letitia? Letitia? Yes, sir. You about ready? Yes. We're about ready to get started. Doug?
Yeah, exactly right. Go ahead. Does it work better for sound for y'all to close that door, or does it matter? Yeah. You want to close or not? Okay. All right, good afternoon. I appreciate you being here. I want to have sort of a quiet conversation with you about what's happened, what it represents potentially as a danger to our community and to the criminal justice system. The most immediate focus is what happened yesterday. A Harris County grand jury, at the request of the district attorney's office, indicted a hero. No question about it, they indicted a hero. Everyone that was out there on August the 28th of 2019 on Harding Street knows that this man right here, Felipe Gallegos, was a hero. He saved lives in a situation in which 4 different police officers were shot. 1 paralyzed for life, hospitalized for a year, diagnosed as a quadriplegic, though he is starting to get some use in his hands. That is an officer loving. This man did not even begin shooting until 2 different officers had already been shot by Mr. Tuttle. I have read and heard it described as the Tuttles were innocent. According to the internal police department investigation of the incident, it does appear, according to their allegations, if it turns out to be true, that these officers was wrongly there on a fabricated affidavit by the lead officer, Officer Goins. But when I'm standing here asking people to presume Officer Gallego innocent, I do not want to prejudge Officer Goins or anybody else's charges in this case. I'm here solely, and these people with me are here solely as the legal team. They're going to volunteer every minute possible and necessary to defend Officer Gallegos until this injustice is over. But I am not going to sit here and talk about the guilt or innocence of other people. That, based on the pending charges against others, is up for a judge and jury to decide. What I am here to talk about, though, is if we continue this anti-police approach, as we also legitimately pursue needed and appropriate judicial reform, then we are not protecting the public, we're endangering them. I want to make real clear that this is not about Black Lives Matter. This is not about people who have criticized police conduct legitimately in certain circumstances. And I can tell you that Officer Gallego and every decent police officer I know, which I vehemently insist is most of them, strongly object and disapprove of what happened to Mr. Floyd. This man, Officer Gallego, and his entire family here caught the virus, has had the virus, because he was there protecting people during the rightful, peaceful demonstrations here in Houston. So he is not here as a man that complains about people complaining about the police. He views his life and obligation is to protect and defend people, whether they are engaging in peaceful protest about issues they care and believe in, or whether their lives are in danger or their property is in danger. So I want to make sure, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand, this is not intended to be the other side of complaints about law enforcement in this country right now. It is to say that we have to understand that the solution to our problems is not to be anti-cop. It is to be anti-conduct in given situations that the facts determine was wrong. The last I counted, we have close to 5,000 police officers here. I could be wrong about the number. Long ago, longer than I would like to remember, I was a prosecutor and taught at the police academy. I remember telling my wives and others during those 7 or 8 years I did it, if the public could only see on video police cadet classes as they're being taught to be police officers, as they are asking questions in a classroom, and as they are expressing concern about how they're supposed to do their job in the future. If we'd had videos of those officers, the public would feel much better because they would discover what I deeply believe. Most police officers, like most prosecutors, quite frankly, like most public servants in the law enforcement world, enter it for the right reasons, with the right intentions. The fact that sometimes people go astray and do wrong things, either intentionally or accidentally, doesn't change the quality and nature of the people that have chosen this as a profession. So as we move forward in trying to right past wrongs and prevent future wrongs, we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. And this anti-cop attitude that is reflected, in all due respect, by our district attorney in Harris County, it's not only wrong morally, It's wrong legally, and it is tremendously self-destructive to the legitimate protection of the public in Harris County. But as I talk further, I want to make sure y'all understand this is not supposed to be the other side of the issue raised by those protesting. This is simply saying, as we look for the right way to do things, we have to have a dialogue in this country, and we have to have a recognition in this country that the solution is not to be anti-cop. The solution is to require and expect of them what most of them expect of themselves: to protect the public, to preserve the peace, and to be fair and honest. And when they stray, the system should jump in to take care of it. But in the meantime, let's talk about the evil of indicting heroes to make a public point, to jump on the bandwagon of a public issue in a way that is intended to help politically an elected official. So let's look who this guy is. 12 years as a police officer. His father immigrated from Mexico at 17. Always wanted to be a police officer. Became a police officer and is now a homicide detective on the police force in Baytown. His son, Felipe Jr., always wanted to be a police officer. Can remember helping his father in things that a 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old could do from the beginning of his life. That's all he wanted to be. That's all he wants to be. That's all he hoped to be. He really wanted to be a SWAT officer. And the irony of what happened on the 28th of January was he was about to finally be one. He had been an auxiliary SWAT officer. What that means is that in addition to regular assignments, some officers who are qualified, have been accepted, can also do part-time SWAT duty in addition to their regular duties. That would mean serving search warrants, serving arrest warrants. He had been doing that and hoped to be full-time. When I say the irony of what happened January 28th of this year, of 2019, is that was to be his last activity as a member of the narcotics division of the Houston Police Officer. The next week, he was to start as a full-time SWAT officer at HPD, which is what he had wanted since the time he'd become a police officer. That was recognized by the other members of his team, so they told him to take the back of the stack. The stack, you may be able to imagine, is the way they approach strategically the execution of a search warrant. So ordinarily, Felipe had been at the front. That's what they usually did. He had more strategic training because of his extra SWAT training and others than other members of the regular narcotics division involved. But this time, everybody wanted to make that front position is the most dangerous. Those of us who were ever in the Army know that that person in the front, that's the most dangerous. And so they wanted to make sure that he was protected. So he took sort of the back. I've not mastered in my own mind that we would, whether there were 8 or 9 involved in this, those kind of things will come out later. We're late to the representation of Felipe and learning the facts, and I'll get to why in a moment. On this particular day, and I want this is very important for everybody to understand. Right now, to stand trial is Officer Goins and Officer Bryant with charges of murder, and it is based on felony murder, as I understand it. I haven't even seen their indictments, alleging that Officer Goins fabricated an affidavit as to previous deal. That was as to previous encounter, and that supposedly what he alleged in this affidavit and swore to under oath was false. That led to a search warrant at a location for which there had not been a buy. These are the allegations. And therefore, they're responsible for the deaths that occurred later. But it's important for everybody out there to know this man and the others on that unit had no idea of that, if that's in fact what happened. They thought they were executing a normal search warrant that was prepared by the division, the lead officer on this particular event. When they were briefed at the station house that what was going to happen, they were told that there was that the house where they was going, and that the man who was listed as the owner of the house had gun, maybe more, and that they had what was described as a vicious pit bull dog. To such a degree, it's an indication as to why they really believed that about the dog. Originally, the intent was to go into the building, and there would be, I've forgotten what we call it. Pardon me?
Flashbang.
A flash.
Flashbang.
Flashbang. And it was, when they found out about the dog, thank you, Doug. When they found out about the dog, they changed that, because if there was going to be somebody, excuse me, an animal running toward them, and all of the smoke that it might create, and it might encumber people where they couldn't see either the dog coming if the dog was upset, or they couldn't see around if there was somebody else there. So they chose not to use it. But it only reflects what they believed originally, what these officers were told about the circumstances. Now, this is kind of touchy what I want to do, because I don't really want to get into a lot of facts that we do. That's going to be for the trial. But I do think it's only fair to try to give you an overview very quickly of what I think is uncontradicted evidence as to what happened. And that is so when they arrive on the scene, and they get out of the van, and everybody goes up in a stack and starts moving toward the door. The lead officer goes in and breaches the door. The door opens, and as many of you have seen, it was the execution of a no-knock warrant. I think the evidence is going to be clear, not just from police, but I think we're going to see that people other than the police heard them yelling, "Police, search warrant." But they were dressed in a way. If you see the pictures later as this thing develops, there's no question that anybody would look at them and know they were a police officer, and it was in broad daylight, and there was even a car out there with police car with their lights on. As they go in, one officer goes in. Officer Gallegos is out toward the front porch. He hears one officer yell, "I'm hit." He hears some gunshots. He then hears some more gunshots. And then officers are starting to back out. When we talk about the Tuttles being innocent, if the allegations against Officer Goins and Bronze are true, it appears they were innocent of drug activity at that scene, as alleged. But once they started shooting, or once Mr. Tuttle started shooting, he was not innocent. And there is no question, and nobody will contradict, that Mr. Tuttle started shooting at the officers. The officers start backing out, and as they back out, Officer Loving is shot, and he's shot through the neck, and he falls. And he can't move. Other officers back out, there's more shooting. Officer Gallegos is going to seize that Officer Loving is there and can't move. The other officers do. They start trying to go up to help him, to pull him out. And as they're trying to pull him out, Officer Goins is shot in the face to such a degree that half his face hangs down, or part of his face just hangs loose. This is what Officer Gallegos is seeing. There is still an officer inside that has been shot. And then he sees Mr. Tuttle stick his arms out and shoot outside. Another officer is shot in the face. And then ultimately, Officer Gallegos engages in fire with Mr. Tuttle, and Mr. Tuttle is killed. When Mr. Tuttle is killed, there were 4 shots found that had been shot and used in his gun, 2 live rounds remaining. A trial will sort out all of what the facts are, and that's good enough except for one thing I want you to remember. There are microphones of all of this, and everything I just described to you lasts 1 minute and 25 seconds. Officer Gallegos responded to the shooting of 4 fellow officers, which included the paralysis of one of them, 2 in the face, 1 in the shoulder. It all happened with 1 minute and 25 seconds. And ultimately, he was able to shoot and kill Mr. Tuttle. I don't know what the state's theory is as to how that could ever remotely be considered murder. And I will tell you why I don't know in a minute. But at the end of the day, that was the scene. The Houston police office, obviously, there was a tremendous investigation in-house by HPD. And though the district attorneys like to take claim for what the allegations they've made, the fact is HPD is the one that in May of 19 forwarded their investigation and their conclusions that supported the indictments of Officer Goins and Officer Bryant. The district attorney's office got that file in May of 2019. Officer Goins and Officer Bryant were removed, and they are to stand trial. They were ultimately charged. What goes unsaid and not understood by me or our team, why in the world was it another 1.5 years before any type of accusation was made against Officer Gallego? Let me tell y'all something. A year ago, I started hearing rumors coming out of the DA's office by people who were disaffected that Kim Ogden wanted them and was pressuring them to charge more officers. I totally discounted that. I even heard that she was pushing for people to be charged out of the Harding Street incident, pushing her own prosecutors. I have no evidence of that, and I didn't believe it. And I told people no. But I heard that one of the people they might look at is the man who had ultimately shot the shots that killed Mr. Tuttle. And I discounted it, but I knew Officer Gallego. And I had met him before. I knew him by reputation. I knew him what kind of officer and human being he was. And so in the course of discounting it, I called him and said, hey, Flip, I'm hearing BS about somebody wants to make a case against you. I know it, I don't believe it. I don't think it's true. But if it ever happens, I'll be glad and proud to represent you. That was over 1 year ago. Things went along. We didn't hear anything. In December, the district attorney's office, now keep in mind, they've had this file for over 1.75 years by this time, contacted the police union and wanted to talk to some officers, interview a couple of officers. They interviewed Officer Loving and Officer Pardo. I wasn't part of anything then. I wasn't representing Officer Gallego. I've since found out. And then I was warning, it looks like they may be starting to circle the wagons again around Officer Gallego. I still discounted it. So there is no way a prosecutor is going to seek to indict a man who shoots someone in self-defense of himself and others in an incident that the person that dies shot 4 police officers. There's no way that's going to happen. Then on January the 4th of this year, Officer Gallego receives a target letter from the district attorney's office saying, we want to talk to you. You're a target. You are invited to testify to the grand jury if you want. You might want to consult an attorney. It is forwarded to me by the police union because I had told him if anything ever happens to him, I will represent him. So I write a quick letter to the DA's office and say, I want you to know I'm representing Officer Gallego. He would like to testify before the grand jury. Can we speak? And I get a note back saying, I'm sorry, we're not going to talk to you. It's not appropriate for us to talk to you while the grand jury is considering evidence. So the DA's office wouldn't talk to me. Now, I want you to meet and who is sworn to do everything we can to help Officer Gallego. To my right is Leticia Quinones, who in addition to having her own firm, is of counsel to our firm. We just concluded a trial with these same kind of issues from the DA's office. With her is Doug Murphy, also, like Leticia, 22-year criminal defense lawyer here in Houston. Doug is also of counsel to our firm in addition to having his own private firm. Both of them have been in the Harris County Criminal District Courts for those whole 22 years. Next is Rachel, and Rachel Lewis has just joined us and is the newest attorney in our firm and has been actively involved in the firm. She is getting her maiden introduction to the Harris County criminal justice system, having joined us after clerking for several judges in December. John McVeigh starts out in New Hampshire. I don't know how he handles July. Comes down after some clerking experiences with a large firm. Has been with me now a couple of years, and he just came from the Federal Public Defender's Office. Naomi Howard clerked for the Court of Criminal Appeals here in Texas and joined me a little over 4 years ago and works on criminal defense cases with me. Somewhere around here is our investigator, Jim Yarbrough, who's was HPD for 20 years and has been with me for 19 and is a member of our firm. Stella Jarris is our legal assistant and has been doing it longer than either she and I want to admit for either one of us. I introduce you to these folks because we are uniformly convinced that not just that he's innocent, but this is a violation of how the criminal justice system ought to work. When you go to indict heroes, the hero better have done something wrong, and you better not be indicting him to make a social statement or picking what's hot for the moment. Stop and think about this. Ms. Ogg takes office in January 2017 with a promise that she will be aggressive in the environmental area and she'll be aggressive in the drug area, and minor drug offenses will be treated differently than the past. Sounds like a great progressive platform. I'd be hard-pressed to find anybody to be opposed to that. Arkema company, chemical companies. Harvey comes in August of 17, and they jump on it and indict a company. I would suggest to you, because there's a great big flame of a fire, and it looks like that it grabs tremendous media attention at the time, and they embark on a prosecution of this company and 3 individuals, regardless of whether they're guilty or not. During the course of the case, they present false information to a grand jury that stays uncorrected until we find out that it's wrong 2 years later. After a long trial that spans part of the virus, a judge rules that the case is so wrong and so insufficient, it's not even presented to a jury, and everybody is found not guilty. That's one thing. Then just most recently, we just said, what I'm going to suggest to you folks, and you local media are giving her a free ride on this, and you have now for 4 years, and I would suggest it's because she's talked about it in a progressive agenda, and it sounds like she wants to make the criminal justice system better and fairer. But you're ignoring a lot of incidents. One of the things you're ignoring, not ignoring now, you've watched it, but if you take examples, you just had the doctor who, with the vaccination issue, and where the arrest was so blatantly wrong, the judge found no probable cause. The district attorney has announced she's still going to seek an indictment on it and go into a grand jury. And now you have another issue before the public in the media of police conduct. And she's indicted for murder, a man who saved lives and was only dealing with the apparent danger to himself and others. What do they have in common? It's a theory of prosecution that is not based on fact, it's not based on law, but it's based on publicity. And in each case, what she's chosen to do is pick an issue that has high public interest, whether it's violation of the environment, whether it's alleged wrongful conduct involving vaccines, or whether it's alleged misconduct by a police officer. That's why we and all of these attorneys in different situations and environments keep talking about this being a political prosecution. I respectfully suggest to all of you and the world at large, Ms. Ogg has embarked upon an approach to criminal justice that is based on pleasing the latest social issue that is hot, and not on what is the right thing to do in terms of guilt or innocence or protecting the public. Felipe is just the latest most outrageous example of this I can imagine. And if we're really trying to find out what happened, please explain to me why he was not allowed to testify to the grand jury. Because here's what happened. We were told we could make him available to the grand jury if he wanted to testify. We could put a grand jury packet and prepare it for him. I wrote back to him and said, since you want to talk to you, I'll tell you. He wants to testify. He'll testify. There won't be a packet. Fine. Be at the Harris County Courthouse tomorrow on the 25th at 8 o'clock a.m. We did that. One reason I mentioned the cross-section of people here, you look long and hard before you will find any defense attorney that wants to put his or her client into a grand jury where you know ahead of time the prosecutor wants an indictment. Thank you. There was a moment on Saturday where this whole group, knowing he was going in, were convinced that he was going to be indicted because she had a political intent to indict him. We had heard that from others. It matched up with what we observed. And uniformly, this group told him he should not testify to the grand jury. He was going to get indicted anyway, and he shouldn't do it. In one of the most signal moments of my career, we go around a room while he explains why he feels he must testify, that he didn't do anything wrong. He believed he had no choice. It's not anything he ever wanted to do, but he felt right would prevail, and that if people heard him and watched him and listened to him, they would understand what was going through his mind and what happened that day. He brought tears to every one of our eyes because this is a man who was talking about the career he always wanted. And he was being told by us maybe it was about to be over. So, Saturday, Sunday, we visit with him and get ready to go to the grand jury. We arrive at the grand jury. Susan, his wife, Chris, I'm so sorry. Cynthia, his wife, is an accountant with a company here. They have a 10 and a 2-year-old. She knows this is all this guy ever wanted to be. She knows also that he's decided he's going to go in and testify to a grand jury that is probably going to indict him. She's a very bright woman. This is not her world. She doesn't know whether this is going to work or not, but she knows that's the way he feels. His father, he raised him. You do right, you be moral, and you be good, and you be honest. And he tells his father, who's a police officer, all told for 27 years, I got to testify. His mother, Alma, and his sister that I just met 30 minutes ago, who wasn't in all these meetings. This is the family of a man that she accused yesterday of doing an execution. She's never met him. She's never talked to him. They never asked to. We get to the grand jury. We lawyers are firmly convinced that because he's telling the truth and he's so persuasive, it's so believable, that if the grand jury looks him in the eye and listens to him and watches his body language as he takes questions from a prosecutor that wants to indict him, and they discover that he doesn't get angry and scream or anything, he just matter-of-factly walks them through what happened. That if he does that, maybe they will overcome what the prosecutor wants. I get there, we've been asking the week before, hey, could you guys put this off? We just got hired. We don't know what the facts are. How do we advise a guy if we don't know anything? No, We can't. This grand jury's term is over. My understanding is tomorrow's their last day. This term is over. They've heard evidence. We're going forward. All right, well, he still wants to testify. We'll be there. So we all get there. We go downstairs. They give us the form that you get that you write out and fill out. Felipe fills out a form that tells him all his rights, what can happen to him if he lies to the grand jury, and we wait. 15, 20 minutes after that, the prosecutor comes down and says, the grand jury has said they don't want to hear from him. They're declining to let him testify. So they don't want to hear from him at all? No. And their position will be to you, if you call them on it was not our decision. The grand jury told us that they wanted to think about it when they heard he was here as to whether he wanted to hear it. They made us leave the room, they say, and they brought us back in and said, we don't need to talk to him. Now, if you believe for 1 second a prosecutor who's been gearing up a grand jury for 3 months would not have been able to persuade a grand jury if they wanted to hear from the person that they apparently have already decided they're going to indict, then I've got some real estate in New York that I'll sell you. It is unconscionable to me and unimaginable to me that any responsible prosecuting authority would not want to hear and give a chance to speak a 12-year police officer who says he is not guilty and wants to explain. It's unconscionable to me that you wouldn't let that person come in. Because when they do, you could disbelieve them, you could watch them, you could listen to them. So why would you not want them to testify? And please don't give me that tired song, that was a grand jury decision. It wasn't ours. That is just bull. Regardless, this is a man who sits here today. He's been relieved of duty, and he will not be working as a police officer until these charges are resolved, one way or the other. To add insult to injury, they informed us yesterday that this officer with the kind of roots in the community I've described, that they were going to seek a $150,000 bond. Think about that. Is there anyone in this room doubting that this man who protests his innocence is not going to show up for court and trial? And you want a $150,000 bond on him? What in the world is that but seeking to punish? At this very time, a progressive DA wants better and seems to have given in to people talking about bond and bail for regular citizens and everything. They want $150,000 from him. This morning, the judge heard the state's probable cause and granted a $50,000 PR bond. And now we go on to the rest. The reason I wanted to wait until we had a press conference, until today, is I wanted to see what the district attorney was going to say yesterday. Because she has press conferences that uses inflammatory language and everything every time one of these highly celebrated issues happen. Those of you who listen know that she called it an execution. If it's an execution, why would you want to at least judge that person you're accusing, see what they say? I have tremendous affection and respect for Letitia, who I want to ask, who has a different point of, not a different, but an additional point of view about this, that she mentioned to me that I wanted her to be able to address with you, because I think it points out the danger of what we're doing here. We're not enforcing the law. We're not protecting the public. We're indicting people that we think different constituencies would approve of. It has nothing to do with whether somebody did or did not do it.
Good afternoon, everyone. As stated, my name is Letitia Quinones, and I've stated this many times before, that I've been fighting in this criminal justice system now here in Harris County for 22 years. I was telling Rachel on my way over here, from the moment I graduated law school, I hung out my shingle with a passion for criminal defense work. And so I've been in the trenches a long time. And I've been in that courthouse when it was across the street and there were only 6 floors, is when I started. And never in my 22 years of practice, and I've stated this before, that I've seen an administration like that of Ms. Oggs. And I say that because of this. In my time of criminal defense work, there's always been a disparity for people of color. I've been blessed to have both sides, and that I am of Latin descent because my father was Dominican and my mother was black. So I see it from all perspectives. And what disheartens me and saddens me and disappoints me most is that in an era where the entire country is hurting and yelling out and yearning for criminal justice reform, for a criminal justice system that will treat people of color, brown and black people, the same as they treat everyone else, that a district attorney will run on that under the guise that she is being progressive, that she too wants criminal justice reform. But you have to look at the intricacies of this case. You have a man of Latin descent, brown in color, who has served our community for 12 years without a spot on his record, who was looking at 4 of his partners, 2 of which their faces were hanging off, 1 of which his arm was hanging off of his shoulder, and the other lie in the doorstep, paralyzed and unable to move out of the line of fire. That in this moment, that he decided to engage a white man who had just shot a black officer and 3 Hispanic officers. That he shot that white man to save his life and the lives of the other officers who were there on the scene that day, who believed, because each one of those officers who were shot never knew, and there's no evidence to suggest otherwise, that the affidavit used to obtain the search warrant could be faulty. So those 4 officers were the innocent ones executing what they believed to be a lawful search warrant, and they were all of color. But they shot and killed a white man that day in defense of their lives. Officer Gallegos did that, and that's the only reason he sits before you today. And that's the only reason those other 4 officers are alive today, is because of his actions. And one of the things that stuck with me after our long meeting on Saturday was he said, I stood behind that tree as the shots were being fired, and I had to make a decision. And the decision that I had to make was whether or not I was going to be a coward or whether I was going to come from behind that tree and do what those other officers depended on me to do. They depended on me to keep my word that I would have their back. And he said he knew then, and I'm sure it's because of what he's seen with his own father and what his own father has taught him about being a true police officer. He said, I knew I had to come from behind that tree, and I had to place myself in the line of fire. I don't think the intricacies and the factors of this case are by happenstance. Let me tell you what I do believe it is. It is inherent mistreatment and disparity in our criminal justice system. It is innate and it's inherent, whether it's intentional or not, because I ask you this, and I want you to think about this. Had there been 4 white officers going into that house of a black man or a Hispanic man shooting and firing an alleged drug dealer, that's all they knew, that he was a drug dealer who carried a weapon with a ferocious dog, that if that was a black or brown man shooting 4 white officers, would we be sitting before you today? Would Officer Gallegos be indicted? You know, it reminds me of another case that I had in this county about 5 or 6 years ago. A stand your ground case, back when that was a hot topic. And a white man had attacked my client, who was a young black female nursing student. One morning on her way to work, they got into a fender bender, and the white man beat on her car and attacked her vigorously through her car. And when he opened her car door, she didn't know him from Adam. She shot and killed him. And she was indicted, only later to be dismissed. If that was a black man attacking a young blonde-haired white girl, would she have been indicted if she would have shot him? This is what's wrong with our criminal justice system. This is why it is broken. And this is why you should be outraged that Ms. Ogg saw fit not to take a deeper look into this case. This is why you should be outraged that she wouldn't even instruct her assistant district attorneys to let this man speak. And as Rusty said, don't buy into the fact that the grand jury didn't want to hear from them. They've been investigating and putting on this case for almost 2 years. They could have set the standard for what that grand jury was to hear. And they didn't do that. And that should be a problem for you. Because an officer should not have to worry when he's going in the line of fire to protect our communities from drugs and violence. I have 2 young daughters, and I'm a single parent. I need police officers to protect my home, to ensure that no one breaks into my door to kill me or rape my children. We need police officers, the good ones. And I will acknowledge that there are bad ones. Of course I know that. Of course I do. But there are also good ones. And before you today sits a hero and a good one. Hold this office accountable. We cannot continue to let this type of conduct slide. It wasn't long ago that we stood before you, Rusty and I, under the same guise of political prosecution. And that's what this office is about. It's not progression. Thank you.
We're about through here for your time, unless anybody else has anything they want to say. In deference to the general police department policy that officers are not allowed to speak publicly, I don't know that there's an actual prohibition, but in deference to that, unless we got any different permission, Officer Gallegos, not just because he's charged, but because of those concerns, won't be making any statement today. But I do want to suggest, if we wrap up here, if you take what Letitia was just saying and put the racial aspect one way, the ethnic aspect away on the side for a second. What is happening here is the district attorney has replaced the bias against minorities with the bias against cops. And what we're trying to say to you is, and she has had, if you go back and look, basically a war against the Houston Police Department, and vice versa. The union has had a war against her and others. We are sitting over here as a group without a dog in the hunt, except when it comes to individual cases. And to charge a man for murder because you have decided to pick a new flavor of things to be against, namely the police, is factually, morally, and legally wrong. A jury can make the decision then, but he should have never been put in this position. And when we do with this sort of anti-cop attitude that is spawned upon by the actions of some, we need to remember we're not making the community safer. We're making it more dangerous. Because to follow up on what Letitia's saying, if you're a police officer and you see what happened to this man in a life-threatening situation with 4 officers shot, and their whole career is at risk based on whatever decision they in good faith make, and later someone comes along later and for the political moment wants to take advantage of it. If you're that officer, what are you going to do? You're not going to police. If you're going to stay, You're going to get a check and go home each day and get the benefits. You're not going to do proactive policing. You're not going to aggressively look for wrongdoers. You're not going to try to enforce the law. You're going to try to avoid being in a situation where you have discretionary decisions to make that any ambitious person can come along and ruin you for. It's a horrible recipe for disaster. And secondly, as a result of this attitude that leads to things like this that she's playing to, you've got all these young officers out there now talking to the people senior to them saying, did I make a mistake? Should I have chosen this as a career? Is this what's going to happen to me? These are the people we need. These are the people you want. And it's not a liberal versus conservative issue. It's not a Republican versus Democratic issue. It is an issue for the average citizen to rise up and say, don't come after us and try to make a political football of the people who are trying to protect us. Yes, aggressively enforce the law. Yes, aggressively investigate. Yes, hold police officers to the right and correct standards. But do not attempt to replace prejudice against one group in our society with prejudice against a profession. When we talk about police as a unit, that is no better than talking about blacks, Hispanics, Asians as a unit. And we are dangerously getting to the situation in this country where we're treating police officers differently as to the presumption of innocence and regularity than we're treating anyone else. It's the same complaint that blacks, Hispanics, and people of color have had historically and still have. Please, please do not let prejudice against one be replaced with prejudice against another. And with that, I would ask you to keep in mind one thing. The statute of limitations on the Harding Street raid, the civil statute of limitations, expires Thursday. That means that Mr. Doyle will file his lawsuit that he's been giving press conferences about and that many of you have covered and written about, that he's been giving press conferences about for 2 years, that Mr. Doyle, who served as the unpaid prosecutor in the Arkema case, is going to file his lawsuit with the big spurge of publicity in the next day or two, if he didn't file it today. You got to ask, well, what is this timing? We wait 2 years, 1 to 2 to 3 days before there's a civil lawsuit filed to indict a police officer and others for things that would be tremendously potentially helpful to the civil lawsuit brought by the attorney that has just represented her in another matter? These are political prosecutions. These are political decisions, and they are incredibly unhealthy and unsafe for our community. I appreciate y'all being here and listening to us. Thank you very much.
Rusty, one quick question.
Yeah.
First off, while you're saying that Mr. Gallegos will not be making any statement, we'll just simply ask how challenging has it been for you to sit here and not be able to say one word?
That's a fair question, but I don't get into that. That's not an unfair question. Go ahead.
How challenging? It's been very challenging because I feel like I haven't been awarded the opportunity to tell my side of the story.
Can you do that by the microphone, Rusty?
Yes, sir.
Again, the question to you, sir, is how challenging has it been for you to sit here and listen to everything and not be able to speak until? It's been very challenging just because I haven't been awarded the opportunity to tell my side of the story, to be able to explain that I'm not the bad person that I'm being painted to be. And not only has it been challenging on me, but it's been challenging on my entire family and my kids. I don't think there's a better way to explain that.
You want to say anything? You don't have to, but if you want.
2 years ago, I said goodbye to my husband as he went off to work. Our son was 2.5 weeks old. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I do remember asking him to please take a couple of weeks off of work to be home on paternity leave, to enjoy the baby, see the baby, be with the baby. But because he knew he wanted to be ready for his promotion with SWAT, he chose to continue to going to work. And the day that he was supposed to say goodbye to the guys and let it be the last day is the day that our lives changed forever.
Rusty, considering what happened before it took place with the raid,
Before what?
before the raid itself, before the actual act of the raid, considering all the acts that led up to this raid, and considering the position that you're taking with your client in all this, and what you're dealing with, how complex of a case is this?
How complex is the case? The case isn't complex. I mean, when you talk about these guys thought they were serving a normal search warrant. They had no reason not to trust the man that had the confidential informant and that was telling them about it. He actually, along with another officer, did a trip around out there to the house in the circumference to look around and see if they saw anything unusual, etc. To them, it was a standard search warrant. Whatever happened before and however that happened, it had nothing to do with his culpability. And it has nothing to do with any of those who were not involved in the other earlier charges on the shooting. I think one I don't want to leave, Officer Goins has been charged, is one of those, obviously, that was also shot too. So it's really three, I think, that were shot that have not even been accused of doing anything wrong during the shooting. But I think that at the end of the day, all we wanted people to do was to look at it from his standpoint, which is what the criminal justice system will do. A trial will look at what was in his mind, what was in his fear, and what was going on, not all the other attendant things that happened either before or after. And I just do not think that you're ever going to find anybody, once they hear him, once they listen to him, once they watch him. I mean, I would give anything to, when I just asked her, that was impromptu, and you could tell she wasn't prepared and wasn't going, she didn't think she was going to be asked for anything. I'm glad she spoke, because this could be my wife 40 years ago. I hate to say that out loud, but it could. It could be so many people we know when their loved ones say goodbye and they hope and trust everything will be okay. Most police officers go through their career without ever unholstering their gun. But every parent and every spouse knows when they walk out the door, it may happen to them. What they have a right to believe, though, is that the system will have their back if they're trying to do what's right. And when the system turns on them solely for the political purposes of another person, it is very hard for them to continue to have faith. You know, there is a racial aspect here that I've noticed over the years. That's a salutary racial aspect, and that is the incredibly large number of Hispanic families who believe in institutions, believe in serving institutions, and want to serve institutions, and pass it down from generation to generation. This family is indicative of a much larger group, and that is people who believe in serving and protecting And as Felipe Sr. always said, doing it the right way. Felipe Sr. always wanted to make sure that Felipe Jr. knew that where he grew up, law enforcement wasn't always honest. And he was bound to determine that not only he was going to be, but this young boy, 2 to 3 years of age, when he started wanting to be like his father, always remembered to do it the right, the honest way. One of my frustrations here, I know that in these kind of circumstances, y'all don't really want to hear from lawyers. You want to hear from the participants. And I sympathize and agree with you. And it may be that one day this family can talk about it and that it will be allowed. And it hasn't been prohibited. We're just talking about the standard approach, and we haven't tested it. But I would give anything if the public could have the same opportunity the grand jury had and rejected.
And Rusty, do you believe that he's being lumped together with the officers that were indicted back in July? They did the 6 yesterday, and you feel like he's very different than Gerald Goins in the role that he played?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I heard the district attorney's press conference, one of my frustrations is I could never hear the question. So if y'all will put up for me on behalf of anybody that may be listening, I'd like to repeat what I understand to be the question. You correct me if I'm wrong. Do I feel like he's being lumped in? I think I understand. Do I feel like he's being lumped in with those for which the police department and prosecutors have contended with the charges engaged in wrong conduct, very bad conduct, fabricating warrants that ended up leading to the death of others? And though I've said I'm not passing judgment on that because I think they have a right to a fair trial, do I think that Felipe, has been affected by that? It would be unusual if the grand jury wasn't. I don't know. I've made it a practice through my career to never criticize grand juries because I don't know what they heard, and I don't know how they were steered, and I don't know what they were not told. So I'm not going to criticize them, but it would not be unfair on their part if they were unable to separate him out from what the other conduct they had heard of. Now, I don't think this grand jury would have been the one that heard the Goins case because, as some of y'all know, a grand jury's term is only 90 days, and the Goins indictment was further back.
That's also we're speaking about, like, in the public discourse.
Yes, yeah, there was tremendous. Yeah, you would have to live in a rock in Houston not to have heard about the Harding Street case. So when those grand jurors took their oath and started, would they already have been conditioned in certain ways? That's possible. The other thing is, would they have been conditioned by whatever the prosecutor said? Because as y'all know, we don't have a written record of what the prosecutor says in there. Prosecutors generally, and I don't know what happened here, we've only been in this case for 2.5 weeks, but prosecutors generally do not have a record made of what the prosecutor is reciting to them about the facts. Ordinarily, the only record that's ever going to be available, and then we're going to have to fight getting access to it, is the record of what witnesses said under oath. So we don't know what witnesses they heard. We don't know what prosecutors told them about the facts. We don't know any of that. So it's possible. I just can't answer as to whether he's being lumped in. But I think, I do want you to understand, that is one of the reasons we wanted this press conference. I wanted to make sure it's out there for everybody because this thing has attracted national attention. I want to make sure about it. This man is not charged with any conduct that has anything to do with an invalid warrant or invalid conduct by others.
Rusty, could either you or if you're okay with it, Officer Gallego, speak to just sort of the realization, you know, after the raid, the allegations against Goins that he had fabricated the warrant and what, you know, this is, you know, you represented that, Officer Gallegos, believe this to be an everyday warrant, one of dozens that he had handled, you know.
Yeah, the reason. No, look. If the allegations prove to be true about Officer Goin and Officer Brown, I would let each officer speak for himself, but I don't think I would be doing untoward. They're going to be extremely bitter about it because their lives were put in danger. What I'm trying to draw the line here is, in fairness to those people accused and their lawyers, I don't want to be using this forum to convict somebody when I'm standing here on behalf of my client asking for the presumption of innocence. So if your question, however, is if I'm presenting that he thought it was a regular warrant, what is the reaction of him and the other officers if it turns out not to be? Is that your question? I think you can safely assume that they are going to be incredibly bitter about it because that didn't just put the lives of the Tuttles in danger. It put the lives of all of these men in danger. But I am not saying it happened. I really do want to make it clear because I'm not the judge or jury. I want the same thing for police officers that I argue for every day. She does, he does, she does, he does, she does. And that is the presumption of innocence of our clients until there is a trial or resolution of the case. And, you know, Jim had, look, this guy and I have been best friends since 1985. As a trained police officer and now in private practice, his question was, whatever happened to the presumption of innocence for police officers? That's what we're screaming out for. Yes, sir.
Your client's case notwithstanding, I think obviously everybody in the room gives your client the benefit of the doubt, and it's up to the justice system to sort through this, and you're making the case right now. You early, and correct me if I heard this wrong, but you earlier drew a comparison between a choice none of us in this room make, and that's our racial and ethnic background versus a career choice someone makes, and that's to be a police officer. And correct me if I heard you wrong.
Wait a minute, I'm not arguing with you. I want to ask you, and I'm having trouble because of a hearing disability. Sure. It's not your fault. I do not want to be the guy that asks somebody to take his mask off in public. But if you can just try again.
Okay. Again, correct. It's part of my job to obviously clarify when I hear something.
Oh, I don't have any quarrel with that.
As I heard you say, you almost basically equated police officers being the new minorities and them facing discrimination versus a system that we are having a very vigorous discussion in the United States about, that people will say empirically proves that people who are of color have faced discrimination systematically from police officers. So could you kind of expound into that? Because I feel like if people listen to you in the live stream, they're going to walk away with what I heard.
And you walked away thinking what?
That you equated police officers being the new minorities, in effect.
That's a good question. I don't quite know how to answer it. I don't mean it quite the way you took it, but I can understand why you did. I guess what I'm trying to say, and I wish they could address it, you have to understand, police officers feel like now the presumption of guilt and wrongful conduct is appropriate to all of them in the public's mind, or a large portion of the public. In that sense, it becomes similar to minorities, in my mind. I'm only speaking for Rusty Hardin right now. In my mind, that becomes similar. I'm not weighing the merit, value in life of either, but that becomes similar to what I and every minority friend of I know experience, where they feel like they're being judged by their color instead of the content of their character. And what I'm trying to suggest, and obviously did it very unartfully, police officers feel the same way now. They are being judged badly by their profession and group, just like a minority is unfairly judged by what ethnic group they belong to. And my point is, both are wrong. And we should not be seeking to resolve prejudice and racism, which everybody legitimately knows exist. We shouldn't be trying to solve that by replacing it with their prejudice against others because of what their unit of activity is, namely a police officer. And if, in fact, that's what I mean, if you make police officers feel they are the besieged minority in the United States now, who are not going to be judged on their conduct, but are going to be judged on the conduct of others, You're doing the same thing. Now, I'm not trying to say the moral equivalency because everybody will agree racism is just a horrible evil in this country. But you are subjecting police officers to the same type of prejudice that Letitia has experienced all her life. And I think what both of us are saying is you can't and should not replace one prejudice with another. The goal is to cure and wipe out and demean and yell against the original prejudice. Does that address anything you're saying, or am I still off on left field with you?
No, I mean, I think it clarifies your point.
Okay, thank you.
Rusty, do you think there might be any cooperating witnesses that may have cut a deal?
Pardon?
Do you think anybody may have cut a deal, and this is why we're seeing these indictments coming in this late? Do you think there's anybody working with prosecutors?
I have no idea. Yeah, I just have no idea.
Separately, you mentioned you've known Felipe Gallegos. I believe your son, is he involved with SWAT, your son personally, Rusty?
My son used to be in SWAT, that's
Oh,
correct.
is he no longer with SWAT?
Pardon me?
Is he no longer with SWAT, your son?
Does he know what?
Is he no longer with SWAT? Is your son still a member of the SWAT team, or does he
No,
run?
no, my son has moved on to another position.
Okay,
But my son being in SWAT is how I knew him.
that's what I was trying to get
That's
to.
the original connection.
Right.
That's correct.
That's what I was trying to ask.
That's how I knew Philippe.
Lastly, I think you indicated there were 2 shots fired by Mr. How many shots did you indicate that Mr. Tuttle fired?
We don't know how many shots he fired. We don't know the evidence. We know that he had 4 spent rounds in his gun and 2 live rounds left. That's all we know. We don't know anything else. And we haven't had access to the evidence. They won't give us any evidence, and now they'll have to because he's been indicted. But prior to indictment, we didn't have any evidence.
So you don't know the ballistics of what gunshots actually hit whom? You don't actually know whose gunshots actually hit whom in that house,
Well, we know that Tuttle shot 4 officers, that his bullets hit 4 officers. We do know that.
you don't know.
I say we know that. That's what we've been told. That's what the evidence is. We haven't had any discussion, however, with the prosecutors or anybody that's against us. So I can't speak for what they're going to contend, but we've seen no evidence of anything other than 4 of Mr. Tuttle's bullets hit 4 police officers.
And forgive me, and I don't recall exactly, I looked at our previous reporting on it, and it said Mr. Tuttle was shot in the neck. Are they contending that it was your client who fired that round that hit him in the neck?
I don't know about his shot in the neck. I think so. But here's the problem. I wouldn't really know which shots they're contending that they're saying that he fired. There is no question that he shot Mr. Tuttle. There is no question about that. The question about which bullet, we have no idea. That's to be determined later.
There's no question that Mr. Gallegos shot Mr. Tuttle?
Yes, we've never contended otherwise.
But the question is, there's no intent that goes with any of the indictments?
No, the point is that if you believe you or others in fear of or in danger of serious bodily injury and death, the use of deadly force is legitimate. It questions what was in his mind at the time he shot. And that's again, when this is going to boil down to, that's again why you would want to hear him in front of the grand jury. Why wouldn't you want to put him in the grand jury and ask him these questions and watch his answer? That's what this case, I think, is going to come back to. It's just never occurred to me that where there's unquestionably question that a citizen shoots at police officers and hits 4 of them, that return fire by the police is going to be appropriate. Anything else?
Rusty, you indicated earlier during your initial statement to everyone that you said clearly, we don't know what the facts are. So I'm trying to ask if it's possible, sir, to clarify. Do you know that Dennis Tuttle shot a certain amount of shots towards the
Yes.
You do?
Well, let me put it this way. According to everybody there is no one that is ever going to say he did not. No one. And that's what's been frustrating when the public dialogue is the suggestion that this was a totally innocent couple. It appears that they were innocent of what they were charged with in the affidavit if the allegations are correct about the others. But it is never going to be innocent where a citizen shoots 4 police officers. That is never going to be innocent conduct.
2 quick follow-ups. Your client was not charged with anything else. He was not charged with any tampering.
That's correct.
Not charged with tampering of any government documents, not part of an alleged overtime scheme. Do you feel that that speaks to the merit and to the character of your client and that he wasn't lumped
I
in?
would never, ever, ever particularly in today's atmosphere, want to hazard a guess as to what they're going to do in the future. So I know what speaks to the marriage right now is he is not charged with anything else. He's charged with this. And he is so incredibly not guilty of it and being unfairly treated that that's sufficient for me to deal with right now.
Rusty, we haven't seen a type of news conference like this at all during Harding Street from one of the individuals that's been charged to this degree. What's the message you're sending to Kim Og today?
You got to quit this. You got to quit this. You got to quit picking prosecution targets on the public publicity potential benefit. That's what she's doing. If you watch her carefully, that's what she's doing. When an issue gets hot publicly, she's going to find somebody to indict, and she's going to try to take advantage of it. And that's what she's doing. He is but a pawn in her constant seeking of personal publicity. Thank y'all very much.